A Sephardic rabbi travels to the heart of imperial China. Walking through the narrow, crowded streets of Kaifeng, he catches a sound that stops him in his tracks. It is faint, drifting through the noise of the marketplace, but it is unmistakable. It is the distinct, rhythmic cadence of Shabbos prayers. He follows the sound, turning down a quiet alleyway until he reaches an ancient building. He steps inside, and to his utter astonishment, the room is filled with Chinese faces, completely indigenous to the region, yet they are chanting the ancient Hebrew prayers with flawless liturgical precision. At the end of the service, the traveler approaches the local leader, expressing his deep awe at finding this community so far from the Levant. He tells him, "I am also Jewish." The leader looks at him, smiles, and replies, "That is funny. You do not look Jewish." For centuries, when people think of the ancient history of Israel, their minds often drift toward white, Europeanized oil paintings or heavily sanitized Sunday school illustrations. We are conditioned to picture a clean, idealized lineage of flawless heroes moving through a predictable landscape. But history has a way of tearing down our neat assumptions. If you look past the modern political boundaries and the layers of institutional conditioning, you find a story that is far more raw, far more complex, and deeply human. You find a narrative of a shattered ancient kingdom whose citizens did not simply vanish into thin air, but left their physical, cultural, and genetic fingerprints in unexpected corners of the world, from East Asia to Sub-Saharan Africa. The true story of the 12 tribes of Israel is not a dry list of names on an ancient scroll. It is a living, breathing mystery. And to understand how this ancient superpower was forged, we have to look past the grand empires, bypass the massive armies, and travel back to the very beginning, to a place where there were no nations or kingdoms, only a single household tearing itself apart from the inside out. The foundation of this global legacy was not laid in a palace. It was formed in the quiet, agonizing isolation of a tent, rooted in the raw domestic warfare of a polygamist household. Long before the 12 tribes became a military force or a geopolitical power, they were simply 12 children born into an environment defined by parental neglect, deep insecurity, and intense sibling rivalry. To understand the blueprint of Israel, we must look through the eyes of Leah, the unloved wife. History often overlooks Leah, treating her as a footnote between her husband Jacob and her beautiful sister Rachel. But the narrative shows us that the very pillars of this ancient nation were explicitly built upon her tears. Leah gives birth to her firstborn son, and she names him Reuben. In ancient Hebrew, this name is Reuben, drawn from the roots ra'ah, meaning to see, and ben, meaning a son. Her exact words are preserved in the ancient texts. "The Lord has surely looked on my affliction. Now therefore my husband will love me." Think about that reality. The very first tribe of Israel was not named after a military victory, a divine decree, or a grand theological concept. It was named after a desperate woman's longing to be noticed by a husband who did not want her. It was a cry for validation, etched directly into the identity of a firstborn child. But the silence in the tent remains. The birth of a son does not change Jacob's heart. So Leah conceives again, and she bears a second son. She names him Simeon, or Shimon, which comes directly from the Hebrew word shama, meaning to hear. She cries out, "Because the Lord has heard that I am unloved, He has therefore given me this son also." First, God saw her affliction. Now, God heard her isolation. The first two standards of Israel stand as a permanent historical testimony that the Creator of the universe pays attention to the very people the world systematically ignores and leaves in the dark. Still, the emotional deficit in the household grows deeper. Leah conceives a third time, naming her son Levi, from the root lava, which means to be joined or attached. She says, "Now this time my husband will become attached to me." because I have borne him 3 sons." She is still reaching out, still hoping that her reproductive utility will purchase the affection she is denied. But history holds a striking piece of irony here. Levi's descendants would never become attached to any ordinary man, nor would they inherit a specific territory of land like their brothers. Instead, they would become the priestly tribe. They would be the ones who carried the ark through the wilderness, stood in the tabernacle, and became exclusively attached to divine service. Leah was begging for the attachment of a human husband, but the narrative reveals that her private pain was being redirected into a sacred calling that would stand between an entire nation and the divine. Then something shifts. Leah gets pregnant for a 4th time. He looks at her life, her unyielding isolation, and the husband who still refuses to see her. But this time, she does not name her child out of her deficit. She names him Judah, or Yehuda, which flows from the root yada, meaning to praise, or to extend hands in gratitude. She looks at the newborn boy and declares, "Now I will praise the Lord." She stops begging for Jacob to love her. She stops measuring her worth by the coldness of her environment. In that single, quiet moment, Leah executes a profound psychological and spiritual pivot. She switches from a state of longing to a state of sovereign praise, and it is this 4th son, born from the moment she gave up trying to buy human affection, who inherits the royal bloodline. It is from Judah that the kings of Israel will emerge, and it is through his lineage that the messianic line will eventually walk. The entire future sovereignty of the nation was anchored in the exact moment an unloved woman decided she was finished begging to be seen. The domestic war within the tents of Jacob does not stop with Leah's shift in perspective. Rachel, seeing her own womb remain empty, is consumed by an intense, desperate jealousy. The household becomes a battlefield of surrogate interventions and tactical escalations. Rachel takes her servant Bilhah and gives her to Jacob, attempting to build a legacy through a proxy bloodline. Bilhah gives birth to a son, and Rachel names him Dan, which means to judge or vindicate. She declares, "God has judged me and has also heard my voice." She views the child as a legal victory over her sister. Bilhah conceives again, bearing a son named Naphtali, meaning my wrestling. Rachel's raw emotion spills out into the open as she says, "With great wrestlings have I wrestled with my sister, and I have indeed prevailed." The standard of Naphtali is born directly out of a fierce, frantic struggle for status within a family circle. Seeing that she has temporarily stopped having children, Leah refuses to cede ground. She retaliates by introducing her own servant, Zilpah, to Jacob's bed. Zilpah gives birth to a son, and Leah calls him Gad, meaning good fortune, or a troop is coming. A second son follows, and she names him Asher, which means happy or blessed, declaring that the women of the land will now call her happy. The naming of these children reads like a series of military dispatches from an ongoing domestic campaign, each child used as a marker to claim territory, luck, and social status. Then comes an incident that reveals just how deeply transactional and fractured this family dynamic had become. Reuben, Leah's eldest son, goes out into the fields during the wheat harvest and finds mandrakes, an ancient plant widely believed to be an aphrodisiac and an aid for fertility. He brings them to his mother. Rachel, still desperate to conceive a child of her own, sees the plants and makes a startling proposition to Leah. She trades a night of companionship with Jacob in exchange for the fertility herbs. Leah agrees, and when Jacob returns from the fields in the evening, she meets him at the edge of the tent with absolute bluntness, telling him, "You must come in to me, for I have hired you with my son's mandrakes." Out of that specific, heavily compromised encounter, Leah becomes pregnant again, giving birth to her 5th son. She names him Issachar, which literally translates to wages or reward. She views his birth as a direct repayment for her transactional sacrifice. She conceives yet again, bearing a sixth son named Zebulun, meaning dwelling or honor, hoping that now her husband will finally dwell with her because she has provided him with 6 sons. It is only after this exhaustive, bitter cycle of competition that the narrative shifts back to Rachel. The text states that God remembered her, and she gives birth to Joseph, or Yosef, which means to add or may he increase. Her immediate reaction is double-edged. God has taken away my reproach, and may the Lord add to me another son. Even in her moment of profound relief, her eyes are already fixed on what is missing, begging for an addition before she has fully processed her current blessing. Years later, on a dusty road near Bethlehem, her second request is granted, but it costs her life. As her soul is departing in hard labor, she names the newborn child Ben-Oni, meaning son of my sorrow. But Jacob, refusing to let the boy carry the weight of that tragic identity, renames him Benjamin, meaning the son of my right hand. Look closely at the raw materials of these 12 names. They are a complex tapestry of sorrow, jealousy, transactional hiring, deep-seated trauma, and rare flashes of sovereign praise. Yet when you trace these names from the deathbed of Genesis all the way to the prophetic architecture of the book of Revelation, you find something extraordinary. The sequence of these names, when read in their chronological birth order, based on their raw Hebrew etymology, forms a complete, unbroken cryptographic sentence. It reads like a grand, unfolding prayer. God looks upon my affliction. He hears me in my isolation. He attaches himself to me. He brings forth praise. He delivers justice. He wrestles on my behalf. He brings a troop of blessings. He makes me happy. He provides my wages and reward. He dwells with me. He will add to my strength, and he establishes me as the son of his right hand. The architecture of this ancient lineage was never built out of pristine, flawless stones. It was designed from the very beginning to take the messy, deeply compromised raw materials of human longing, heartbreak, and internal warfare, and organize them into a symmetrical master design that could outlast global empires. The transition from a highly dysfunctional nomadic household into a massive, multi-million citizen nation did not erase the psychological fault lines running through the bloodlines. The characteristics forged in the tents of Jacob manifested as literal geopolitical realities when the 12 tribes finally inherited the land of promise. The tribal boundaries and political alignments split cleanly along the ancient lines of maternal rivalry. As the centuries rolled on, the unified kingdom under David and Solomon collapsed under the weight of political arrogance and underlying tribal tensions. The nation fractured into 2 distinct entities: the southern kingdom of Judah, anchored by the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, holding on to the temple city of Jerusalem, and the northern kingdom of Israel, a powerful coalition of the remaining 10 tribes, dominated by the descendants of Joseph through Ephraim and Manasseh. The northern kingdom, though wealthy and militarily aggressive, quickly slid into systemic political instability and severe idolatry. They built rival altars, turned their backs on the unified sanctuary, and drifted away from their foundational identity. Then, in the 8th century BCE, a massive, unyielding shadow fell across the region. The Neo-Assyrian Empire, the most ruthless military machine of the ancient world, turned its sights toward the Mediterranean coast. In 722 BCE, the Assyrian king, Sargon II, breached the walls of Samaria, the capital of the northern kingdom. The Assyrians did not simply conquer nations, they systematically erased them. Their strategy was one of brutal, total forced deportation. They rounded up hundreds of thousands of Israelites, marched them out of their ancestral lands, and scattered them across the distant, untracked northern and eastern provinces of their vast empire, replacing them with foreign captives from other conquered lands. This catastrophic event created what historians call the Assyrian Void. Overnight, 10 entire tribes, representing the vast majority of the covenant people, completely vanished from the formal diplomatic records of the ancient Near East. Western historical texts traditionally treated this event as a terminal point, a blank space where millions of people were simply absorbed into the surrounding pagan populations and ceased to exist. But oral traditions across the globe have long whispered a very different story. The ancient stones of Assyria testify to the physical collapse of the kingdom, but they could not track the hidden migrations of the human spirit. The blueprint was designed to survive the scattering. Empires could tear down stone walls and erase written archives, but they could not wipe away the unwritten survival codes passed down from parent to child in the dead of night. For generations, the memory of these 10 tribes did not die in the ashes of history. It quietly walked on the feet of nameless wanderers, crossed vast deserts, and hid deep within the lifeblood of generations, silently waiting for a future age to unlock its secrets. For centuries, traditional history books chose to look past the claims of these scattered, far-flung communities. But in our modern era, an unexpected witness has stepped forward to bridge the gap between ancient memory and cold reality, the microscopic world of genetics. Deep in Sub-Saharan Africa, stretching across the borders of South Africa and Zimbabwe, lives the Lemba people. For hundreds of years, the Lemba maintained a distinct, unyielding lifestyle that completely separated them from the surrounding dominant, Bantu-speaking populations. Their neighbors viewed them with a mix of respect and curiosity, because the Lemba fiercely guarded an ancient oral history. They insisted that their forefathers were not native to Africa, but had migrated from a white city far to the north, called Senna, crossing the waters to establish new roots. Even without access to written historical archives, the Lemba lived out an unmistakable cultural code. They practiced strict circumcision long before Christian missionaries arrived on the continent. They absolutely refused to eat pork or any meat that had not been ritually slaughtered by an elder in a specific manner. They observed a sacred day of rest every Saturday, refusing to work or engage in trade until the sun went down. They wore unique prayer shadows and guarded a sacred object known as the Ingoma Lungundu, a large, heavy drum covered in animal hide that was never allowed to touch the ground, used to carry their most sacred artifacts, an object that bore an uncanny structural and functional resemblance to the biblical Ark of the Covenant. Despite these pristine cultural fingerprints, external observers consistently dismissed the Lemba's claims of Middle Eastern ancestry. That was until a team of international geneticists decided to subject their oral history to rigorous DNA analysis. Scientists focused heavily on Y chromosome sequencing, which tracks genetic markers passed down directly from father to son, completely unchanged through generations, making it an invaluable tool for tracing ancient patriarchal lineages. The researchers established a baseline using the Cohen Modal Haplotype, a highly specific genetic signature predominantly found within the Jewish priestly class, the Kohanim, the literal descendants of the ancient tribe of Levi. When the genetic data from the Lemba was fully processed, the results sent shockwaves through the scientific community. Not only did the Lemba display a massive, undeniable genetic signature originating from the ancient Middle East, but within their specific priestly clan, known as the Buba clan, the presence of the Cohen Modal Haplotype was staggeringly high. Over 50% of the men in the Buba clan carried the exact same distinct genetic signature found in the most traditional Jewish priestly lineages worldwide. The molecular data verified what oral history had preserved through centuries of isolation. These men were the literal, forensically verifiable descendants of the ancient tribe of Levi. Similar breakthroughs began to emerge across other hidden pockets of the globe. In northeast India, The B'nai Manasseh community had long maintained that they were the sons of Manasseh, one of the sons of Joseph, surviving for millennia on the borders of Myanmar. In Nigeria, the Igbo people clung to ancient migration narratives, linking their origins directly to Hebrew roots, maintaining cultural codes that mirrored the laws of the Torah long before European colonization. Even the descendants of the Kaifeng Jews in China, despite deep physical assimilation over centuries of intermarriage, still held on to the structural memory of their liturgical prayers. These discoveries reveal a profound transformation in how we must view our shared past. When we step out of the static world of those idealized, pristine Western oil paintings and look at the actual living world, the neat, uniform boxes of history begin to break apart. We are forced to confront a reality that is far more vibrant, diverse, and unexpected. The true remnants of these ancient bloodlines are found in resilient, deeply melanated communities who carried the genetic and cultural weights of their ancestors across thousands of miles of hostile terrain, preserving an identity that institutional history tried to erase. When you stand back and look at the entire sweeping arc of this narrative, you realize that the story of the 12 tribes of Israel is not an information dump of ancient genealogical data. It is a profound, beautifully integrated master design. It is a story that begins in the raw, claustrophobic pain of an unloved woman's womb, moves through the violent fires of geopolitical conquest, stretches across thousands of miles of geographic exile, and ultimately lands in the cold, precise chambers of modern molecular science. The most remarkable feature of this entire structural journey is found at the very end of the biblical text, in the architectural vision of the New Jerusalem. The text explicitly describes a massive, radiant city descending from the heavens. The city is perfectly symmetrical, featuring 12 grand gates that serve as the only entry points into the eternal sanctuary. And etched deeply, permanently onto each of those 12 doors are the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. Think about the profound structural symmetry of that reality. The names on those eternal gates are the exact same names that were whispered thousands of years earlier through the tears of Leah, born out of household neglect, sibling jealousy, and personal brokenness. The name of Reuben, born from an agonizing plea to be seen, is on a gate. The name of Simeon, born from a cry to be heard in isolation, is on a gate. The name of Levi, born from a desperate search for human attachment, is on a gate. And the name of Judah, born the moment a wounded soul decided to stop begging and start praising, leads the entire procession. The biblical vision at the end of the story is not a collection of pristine, flawless heroes who did everything right and lived untouched by the pain of the world. It is an architecture built entirely out of the restored. It is a monument that honors the scattered, the exiled, the broken, and the forgotten. Every single one of those tribes broke, wandered, fell, and was carried home across the long, untracked roads of history. And yet, their names are still carved into the doors. This truth steps out of the ancient scroll and speaks directly into the modern human heart. It reveals that your current environment, your personal isolation, or the structural brokenness of your origins does not dictate your ultimate value in the grand design. If an enduring global legacy can be intentionally forged out of the raw materials of an unloved womb and a scattered genetic exile, then your personal suffering is never a disqualification. In the economy of the Creator, the pain you are forced to carry today is not waste material. It is the very masonry being shaped, refined, and prepared to form the foundational pillars of an unbreakable legacy.